To create a JavaScript development environment for React from scratch, you need to install a few dependencies and wire them to work together. The tools that are usually used for development environments are constantly changing. So what I'm going to do in this video right now might be different from what you need to do when you watch the video. This is the reason I created this guide under jscomplete.com/reactful. I'm going to try to keep this guide up to date when things change. So when you're ready to create your own barebone environment, you can just follow this guide. In this guide, I also wrote the details behind the libraries and tools that make up a full stack JavaScript environment for React. We don't have a lot of time in this course to go over every single element in an environment and every single configuration that's needed, but I'm going to explain the big pictures here, and you can get the more detailed version in this guide. So our first step is to install the dependencies. So I'm going to scan through this guide until we have an actionable step. This is your first step. You want to start with an empty directory. So go ahead and create a directory. We go into that directory and we run the npm init command. And this command is going to ask us a few questions about the package that we're creating. Now we can just pass the y argument for yes and just go with the default in here. So when this command is done, you should have a package.json file in your system. Okay, the next step is to install the dependencies. Now, this guide is designed for a full stack JavaScript environment. That means that it will get you ready to do things like server-side rendering, not just have a front-end React application. And this is why the next dependency here is Express. And Express is a framework to create a Node.js web server. This web server is your first step to do server-side rendering of your React application. So let's go ahead and install Express in here. The npm install command will download the Express package and it will place it under a node modules folder. Now, we didn't create a node modules folder, but the npm command is going to create this node modules folder for us. And it will also write this new dependency to the package.json file, which we just created with npm init. So let me open up an editor here on this directory and take a look at things. We only have a package.json file. And as you can see, the npm install command immediately wrote this new dependency to our package.json. And it also created the node modules folder and installed a lot of packages under the node modules folder. These packages came from the dependencies of Express itself. And by depending on the Express package, you're really depending on all these other dependencies. And all of them got installed when you installed Express. Okay, let's keep going. The other dependencies that you need are React and React DOM. So let me put them to install. These are the actual packages that contain the React core library and the React DOM library that we need to use to render a React application to the DOM, or when we actually use server-side rendering as well. Both of these renderers are within the React DOM package. Keep going. Other dependencies that you need. Webpack. Now, what is Webpack? Webpack is a module bundler. So when we take our React application into the file system, we're going to put it in multiple modules. We're going to also depend on multiple external modules like React and React DOM. So when we ship things to the browser, we need to ship everything as single bundle because browsers don't know how to work with modules yet. This is going to change in the future. The normal practice to ship JavaScript applications is just to bundle all your application in a single file and ship that to the browser. So the Webpack package, and you need the core library here under Webpack, and you also need the command to invoke the library, which is under the Webpack CLI package. This Webpack package is going to do the bundling for us. We're going to tell it start from file X, and then everything that file X require, bring it under a single bundle file. And then we can serve that bundled file on our web server and use it to mount the React application to the DOM. So this is Webpack. All of these dependencies that we're installing are local dependencies. They go under the node modules folder, and the npm install command is going to write them to our dependencies section in package.json. Now, these are production dependencies. These are main dependencies, which means when you install things on a production server, you're going to get all that as well. And here's the thing, depending on your deployment strategy, you might not really need these to be on a production server. You might opt to package everything locally first and then just deploy ready bundled file to production. In that case, you would not need Webpack and even React and React DOM in your production dependencies. But I'm going to assume the simplest deployment strategy here, which is just to push the code to production and bundle things for production right there in the production server, rather than pushing bundled code in your source control repositories. Okay, we have Webpack. Other dependencies that we need are the Babel stuff. So you need this whole line here. And let me talk about it while it installs. So Babel is the package that compiles JSX into regular React API calls. You need to hook Babel into the Webpack process because Webpack is going to be bundling your system. So we need to tell Webpack that while it's bundling the system, if it sees any JSX stuff, it should invoke Babel to convert this JSX stuff into React API calls. And the package that we can use to do that is called Babel Loader. And the other packages are needed for configuring Babel. This is the core package for the Babel compiler. This Node package is needed if you're doing server-side rendering. You also need Node to understand JSX. And the two presets here are really the minimum configuration that you need to tell Babel to compile React. So React preset is for the JSX. And the env preset is if you want to use any modern JavaScript and you want to target older browsers. Like for example, when you use an arrow function and you want to target an older browser that doesn't understand arrow function, this env preset can compile your code to not use arrow functions. Most modern browsers will understand arrow functions, and this is why this env preset is customizable. You can tell it which browsers to target. If you tell it to target more recent browsers, then the size of the bundle that it generates will be smaller. Okay, we have Babel. So now let's talk about the development dependencies. So these are definitely development dependencies. You don't need them in production, and you can install them with the -d flag to mark them as development. One of them is NodeMon. NodeMon is a package that lets us automatically restart Node when we change things in Node, because Node requires you to restart it every time you change something. And it doesn't have a development mode by default. You have to keep restarting the main Node process to test things out. So this NodeMon is a watcher on top of the Node command, and it will automatically restart the command when you save changes to disk. Very handy. The other very important development dependency is ESLint. So let's go ahead and bring in ESLint. If you've noticed, I've made some mistakes while developing in the playground, and I didn't have the eyes of ESLint to immediately tell me that I've made mistakes. If you have ESLint integrated in your editor, you don't need to go through these mistakes. You don't need to actually run your code because ESLint is going to immediately analyze your code and tell you that you have a problem or your code is lacking in certain qualities, for example. You can have consistent styling to your code by using ESLint and by sharing the ESLint configuration across team. So the whole team will, for example, use single quotes instead of double quotes, and they will all do semicolons because ESLint can do these checks on the code as you type. But beside the consistency in styling, you will also get other very valuable errors. Like, for example, you've used a variable that you didn't define. That's probably a mistake. Or a variable that you've defined is never used. That's also a mistake. Why keep unused variables around? Plenty of very valuable feedback as you type and as you save your files. So definitely have ESLint in your stack and in your editor. Now in here, we're changing ESLint to understand the Babel and also work with plugin for React. This plugin is going to make ESLint understand JSX and understand facts like if you're using JSX, then you have to have React in scope and other plenty of recommended settings that are specific to a React project. So definitely a good thing to have in a React project. Okay, let's take a look at the dependencies. We have the main dependencies in here, and we have the development dependencies here. So these are written to the package.json file under the dev dependencies section. And if you install things on a production server, you do not get the dev dependencies by default, which you don't. You don't need a NodeMon process on your production server. You don't really need to run ESLint on your production server. You might need to run ESLint on your continuous integration server, but you can configure that server to install dev dependencies. So these are all the dependencies that you need for a bare bone, full stack JavaScript development environment for React and Node. In the next video, I'll tell you how to configure these tools to work together.